Good afternoon. I'm David Luberoff, Deputy Director of the Joint Center for Housing Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our online event. Before we begin, I have just realized that I'm looking at the wrong introduction here. Hang on one second. There's the right one. I'm still David Luberoff. On behalf of the Joint Center and Harvard's Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston, which is co-sponsoring this session, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this discussion of Cambridge's new 100% housing overlay zoning. Before I introduce our speakers and our event, I have three quick housekeeping items. First, we're hoping to use Zoom's transcription service if you need it. And you should be able to find it down on the menu. That is for those of you who need closed captioning. Second, you can use Zoom's Q&A function to ask a question, which we'll hopefully get to in the latter part of the event. We won't get to all of your questions. I apologize in advance, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. And finally, because this question always comes up, we will be posting both the slides and then once we get it captioned more accurately, a video of today's talk. That'll probably be sometime early next week. Now to today's event. At the end of 2020, in an article on the 10 big housing wins of 2020, Randy Shaw, one of the more astute observers of housing policy these days, who also directs the Tenderloin Housing Clinic in San Francisco, wrote that, quote, Cambridge's enactment of a citywide zoning overlay for the 100% affordable housing offers a model for all high housing cost blue cities. It's perfect for cities where progressive opposition to market rate housing keeps racist and elitist exclusionary single family zoning in place. We've been following the many-year discussion about this idea in Cambridge for some time, and we thought, given an endorsement like that and our own interest, that it would be interesting to put together an event that answers three basic questions, or tries to. First, what is a 100% affordable housing zoning overlay? Second, how did it come to be, particularly in a place like Cambridge at a time when state law required 6 of the 9 city councilors to vote in favor of this. And third, and perhaps most important, is how is this going to change the actual process of developing affordable housing? Unfortunately, we've got 3 terrific people who can help us answer those questions. We're going to start with Iram Farooq, Cambridge's Assistant City Manager for Community Development, who will explain to us what 100% affordable housing overlay district is. After that, we'll step back for a second, and City Councilor Marc McGovern, who played a central role in getting this legislation passed, will talk a little bit about how it came to be and what it took to get those 6 votes. And then Noah Sawyer, Director of Real Estate for Justice Start, a Cambridge-based community development corporation, will, Noah, actually, if you can stay off for just a second, sorry. Noah will talk about how it is being used right now for the first time in a project in a part of Cambridge whose geography we were actually just talking about how to describe. That'll take us about a half an hour. We'll use the remaining time to answer at least some of your questions. We will also share the questions with panelists in case they want to follow up. I think this is a really important and significant development in addressing what is increasingly one of the major problems in the United States. So, Iram, you want to help us start us off and help us learn about what is a 100% affordable housing zoning overlay?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to step back for a moment, but David did a great job of setting me up so I can skip some of what I have in my, whoops. Oh no, I'm sorry, I am in, whoops, there we go. pardon me for the issues. I just wanted to step back and talk for one moment about the challenges of Cambridge. We're small, but we struggled with the post-industrial challenges that many cities did, and found our path to prosperity starting in the 80s, 90s, and up to today through access to the knowledge economy and really building a center for life sciences here in Cambridge. So that's well and good, but the flip side of that is really that the impact it has had on real estate affordability, to the point that affordable housing is really one of our greatest challenges as a city. I wanted to mention, just to set the stage, that there are a number of initiatives that we have that address that challenge or attempt to address that challenge. The key amongst those are really channeling a lot of city funding towards affordable housing. At last count, it totals approximately or just over $20 million a year going from city sources. In addition, in the 90s, after the demise of rent control in Cambridge, there were two different zoning ordinances that were adopted. One being our Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance, which is essentially an affordable set-aside. It used to be about 11.5%, and the council adopted an amendment in 2015 to increase that to, in 2017 to increase that to 20%. It has to be on site, and you cannot buy your way out of it. We also have an incentive zoning ordinance that is essentially a linkage from commercial development, and that is a per square foot payment that, as of last count, is about $20.30 per square foot. That leaves the biggest challenge being access to sites to develop affordable housing, and the challenges that emerge from legal appeals to discretionary permits, which is what is required for any large development. Even though the state has facilitated this through a 40B expedited permitting process, the fact that it's still a discretionary permit means it's open to all sorts of appeals and therefore delays, which we have seen several of, and that can be really deadly for an affordable housing project. This is a picture of where the affordable housing in the city is located. The darkest colors being the largest number of units. These are census blocks, and the white areas being the ones that have virtually no housing, no affordable housing. And those white areas, you can see, they're not areas that are exclusively commercial, for instance. They are in fact our low density residential areas where we have not found any way to make inroads into development of affordable units. This is our zoning map, and you can see the light yellow, the yellows are residential districts, and the lightest yellow mirrors where the affordable housing is not found. Just for a moment, stepping back in history to a redlining map of Cambridge, the purple dots represent affordable housing locations, and you'll see, sadly, that they overlay in a most concentrated way on the red areas, which were the deemed hazardous, and to some degree on the yellows, which are the definitely declining areas. One could look at this and be really depressed, but I try to see the positive in here, because there are a lot of purple dots on the white areas, which were the areas not classified, principally because they were industrial and nobody expected housing to be developed there. But we do have housing there, and it isn't, for the most part, exclusively affordable. These are inclusionary units in market rate buildings, for the most part, and they are in the white areas because in the early 2000s, we actually adopted zoning that made housing possible throughout the city, including in what used to be industrial and commercial districts only. So, given that zoning is really a representation of our values as a community, I think that we made a change in 2000 to make housing be able to be developed throughout the city. And we felt like it was time to actually allow affordable housing to be developed similarly throughout the city. So the three legs of the stool for the affordable housing overlay, which was our attempt to address the last remaining challenges around affordable housing development, was to, one, really allow more development, bigger, taller buildings for affordable housing than for any other use, to have those provisions apply citywide, so that we moved away from this this concentration in certain parts of the city, and to have a much more streamlined, non-discretionary review for 100% affordable housing buildings. In this provision, all of the units must be affordable, deed restricted for the life of the building. They are affordable up to 100% of the area median income. And there are restrictions so that in rental buildings, at least 80% of them must be affordable to 80% or less of the area median income. And in home ownership, 50% or more must be for low mod. They can be all the way up to multifamily, but smaller as well. And there is a modest amount of ground floor retail allowed in the commercial districts. So this gives a sense of, at the bottom right is our zoning map, and you can see how we've mirrored the areas. This shows the density and heights that would be allowed under the overlay. So if you go to districts that currently have heights of less than 40 feet, you would be allowed to go up to 50 feet with active ground floor, or otherwise 45 feet. Those were mostly the exclusively residential districts. In the commercial corridors, which currently allow up to 45 to 50 feet in height, you would be allowed to go to 6 stories or 65 feet and a little taller with ground floor retail. And in the more concentrated, like squares and such, you'd be able to go to from 50 feet to 7 stories or 80 feet. The purple districts are industrial, and they already allow taller development, so you'd be able to develop per the base. There are provisions that allow or that require transitions to low scale residential. This is important because ultimately, zoning can always be changed, and we want to make sure that whatever we get is actually something that does not create a huge backlash and result in a change back from the overlay. The provision also allows reduction in setbacks and open space requirements, reduction in parking. No parking is required for auto vehicles, but there is bike parking that would be required. Blue Bikes is our shared bike system, and that would allow further reduction. We also, there was a lot of concern given our historic fabric, and there are provisions that would encourage use of existing buildings if there are historic structures on a site. And then we have standards for building and site design that go along with this. There's so much here, so I'm going to not go through all of these because you will be able to read these in the slides. But really the idea is to try to create enough massing and site design predictability so that even neighbors have a sense of what is likely to go up, what is possible to go up next to them for an affordable housing building, while at the same time making sure that there is predictability also on the development side. There is an advisory design consultation piece that is required, and that includes requirements for public meetings to make sure that there are opportunities for neighbors to be able to comment. And there is a hearing and a design discussion at the planning board based on a set of design guidelines that has been developed as a companion piece to the zoning. And this was something that folks felt very strongly about, and that was the big concern. And that was the big concern that a lot of people had, that design in a historic fabric is something that a lot of people in Cambridge care about. And we wanted to make sure that there's some way to address that concern while still allowing an as of right development. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to you, David.
Thank you. And that's a lot to pack into a pretty small amount. Iram, actually, if you can leave your camera on, we'll go to a little bit of a panel here. Let me invite Marc McGovern and Noah Sawyer to join us to sort of round out some of the picture here. Marc, I think as you and I first discussed, my first job out of college was a city council, was to cover the city council in Cambridge as a newspaper reporter. And my impression was it was pretty hard to get 5 city councilors to agree that it was Tuesday, or actually today's Thursday. How in God's name did this get passed? What did it take to make this happen? And what lessons might other folks take from that? I know some of it is some peculiarities of Cambridge politics.
Thanks. Thank you, David. And thanks for having me. I noticed that you, after covering the Cambridge City Council, you got out of the reporting business. So I don't blame you.
Hey, so did Bill McKibben, who was there too.
Yeah. So yeah, this was a lengthy process. So I'm going to actually, if I can, just sort of walk through kind of what what that process was and sort of some of my feelings as to why this was so important and what the overlay was really meant to address. Okay, let me just pull this up here. So, so let's pull up the first. Okay, so go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I'll walk you through a little bit of what the process was. So from 2017 to 2018, Envision Cambridge was a citywide planning process that took place by the city that looked at a whole host of issues across the city to make recommendations around housing and the environment and commercial and all kinds of things. So there was a housing working group, and around 2017-18, recommendations for an affordable housing overlay came out of that group. From January to March 2019, the City Council's Housing Committee held 5 public hearings on the overlay with public comment and public discussion. In April 2019, the AHO petition was filed with the City Council and was then forwarded on to the Ordinance Committee, which held 5 additional meetings on the overlay. As is the process, not only does the petition go to the Ordinance Committee, but it goes to the Planning Board. The Planning Board held, and this is in 2018-19, held 3 additional meetings on the overlay, again, public meetings, allowing for public comment and public input. The city, under Iram's leadership, hosted 15 neighborhood meetings from September 2018 to June 2019. There were 7 open houses from June 2019 to September 2019. And through all of that, as you mentioned, David, the Massachusetts law required that 6 votes were required to pass a zoning change. We had 5 votes, which is a majority of the city council. There are 9 city councilors, but it did not meet the 6 required votes. So the AHO expired in September of 2019. Next slide. In Then there was an election that took place. And in that election, one of the councilors who was opposed to the overlay and voted against it was not reelected. And a new city councilor who ran in part on his support of the overlay was elected. And so that gave 6 votes to the overlay. So in February 2020, I actually refiled the overlay with the city council. COVID hit, everything blew up. We kind of just let it sit, and it expired in May of 2020. On June 8th, 2020, we refiled it again. In July, a month later, there was another ordinance committee meeting, planning board hearings, another ordinance committee meeting, and then eventually the AHO went to the full city council and it passed with a favorable vote of 7-2. And so you can either, I have another slide, but I'm going to get to it in a minute. But what you could see is that there were over 40 public hearings on the AHO. And in total, and I'll talk about this in a second, we discussed 62 amendments to the original version, of which we adopted 46 of them. So you can see that there was a great deal of public process. And these slides do not even include the numerous articles that were written about the AHO, all the social media conversations, the flyers that went out. There were organizations that were in favor of the AHO that flyered neighborhoods. There were organizations who opposed the AHO who flyered neighborhoods. As I mentioned, there was a campaign, an election that year. So every campaign candidate forum and debate, every time you knocked on a door, the AHO was a topic. There were mailings done, et cetera. So this was really, in my opinion, one of the most talked about issues I've seen in my 16 years of public office. Now, the thing about process is this: if someone likes a project or a policy, then the process can't go fast enough. If someone doesn't like a project or a policy, then you can never have enough meetings to satisfy. So the process became a big part of the conversation. So you must, of course, do your due diligence. You must provide people with multiple opportunities and avenues to participate. But at the end of the day, at some point, you have to pull the plug on the process and actually vote on something. And the folks who don't like that result, whichever way it goes, will likely, point to the process as not being a good one, but that is what it is. Now, one might think that in a city where affordable housing is consistently rated the #1 issue that residents care about, far exceeding education, traffic, the environment, public safety. And in the most recent city survey that came out in January 2021, affordable housing even outpaced concerns over COVID. So with affordable housing being that much of a priority, one might think that passing a relatively modest zoning proposal that minimally increases height and density and streamlines permitting would be widely well received, especially if it's going to accomplish this goal of leading to more affordable housing. Well, that was not the case. And the AHO turned out to be, whether you liked it or you didn't, one thing we could probably all agree on is that it turned out to be one of the most divisive issues in recent times, and was the main issue in the 2019 municipal elections. We heard various concerns. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So here were some of the major concerns that we heard. Most of the concerns came from neighborhoods that had less affordable housing in them. We heard about that the overlay would change the neighborhood character of the neighborhoods. We heard concerns about height, mostly around shadows and blocking out the sky. We heard concerns about density, that a building would be too big for the neighborhood. The streamlining permitting process, we heard concerns that there would be a loss of an appeal, so people wouldn't be allowed to sue or to appeal decisions made by the planning board. We heard concerns about the loss of input at the planning board, that was non-democratic, that by taking the planning board's power away, or not mandating their approval, was sort of shortcutting the democratic process. And we heard some things that quite honestly were a little disturbing to me. Folks brought up safety. We had people who said, we're a safe neighborhood. We don't want affordable housing, as if people who live in affordable housing will make your neighborhood unsafe. We heard concerns about services. Where will those people shop? These are actual quotes. I'm not making any of this up. There were concerns about trees, and the potential loss of trees was a concern. And then there was this bigger concern of, we have done enough. Cambridge has more affordable housing in terms of a percentage than most other communities, and certainly above the 10% that that the state sort of says we should have. We're well above that. And so there was this other issue of, we've done enough. We have plenty of affordable housing. Why do we need to do more? So a couple of things I want to also focus on, and sort of what was sort of, my thought process and some of the issues that came up. When we talk about zoning and development, we often get caught up in density and height and shadows and traffic and parking, the facade of the building, what's it going to look like? And those conversations, although certainly important, are often used to either kill a project or significantly reduce the size and units in a project. What we forget, especially when we're talking about housing development and affordable housing development in particular, is what we're really talking about are people. The number of units you build is not just a number on a spreadsheet. Those units represent a home for someone, a home that could literally change somebody's life. I cannot tell you how many people come up to me virtually every day, 2 calls today, in fact, from folks begging me to help them find an affordable place to live in Cambridge. And honestly, it is heartbreaking. And I think when we need to keep those people in the forefront of our minds when we talk about these issues, because that's really what it's about. So everybody in Cambridge says that they support affordable housing. My response is often, do you support it enough? Do you support it enough to have a building on your street that may be bigger than what you might like? Do you support it enough to have a building on your street that may look different than the other buildings on your street? Do you support it enough for it to change the character of your neighborhood? And I'm not even sure what that means, because neighborhood character changes over time all the time. So I'm not sure which era of character you're trying to protect. So I often say that it's easy to support something until you're asked to sacrifice something for it. And in theory, everyone supports affordable housing. But when it comes to actually building it, unfortunately, many folks put a litany of other priorities ahead of it. And that's kind of what we saw in this discussion. Another thing for me is that the AHO is also an equity issue. There, as Iram sort of pointed out with those maps around the redlining, there are neighborhoods in almost every city where invisible lines have been drawn to keep certain people out, and Cambridge is no exception. Cambridge, like many places, has a zoning history that is rooted and built on racism and classism. For example, there are neighborhoods in Cambridge where in the 1940 census, 0.49%, so less than 0.5% of the people in those neighborhoods were Black, were designated as Black. Based on 2017 numbers, so from 1940 to 2017, the percentage of Black residents in those same neighborhoods was just over 2%. Not exactly a huge increase. And I firmly believe that zoning has a large part to play in that. Those neighborhoods we only allow single family housing to be built. So if anyone knows Cambridge, a single family house in Cambridge goes for well over $1 million. So if that's all you're allowing in certain neighborhoods, then it's not that hard to understand that those homes will be out of reach for low and middle income buyers, many of whom are Black and brown. So by making it easier for affordable housing to be built in those neighborhoods, by changing the zoning and giving incentives to make it more financially viable for affordable housing to be built in those areas, we can begin to break down those invisible walls and hopefully start to undo the institutional racism and classism that our zoning was built on. As far as getting the AHO passed, as I said, the first version did not pass. We needed 6 votes. We only had 5. We debated over 60 amendments, adopted 46 of them. I say that both as a sort of a reality that no zoning comes out the way it goes in, which it shouldn't. It changes should be debated and discussed and amendments should be made, but also a little bit of a warning. And, you know, of course, as I said, compromises and collaboration have to happen, but no single policy is going to solve all the ills of your city. So for example, instead of the overlay sort of being a little more straightforward and focusing on the height, the density, the permitting, and setting some predictability, we filed amendments that tried to solve our tree canopy problem in the overlay, our traffic problems in the overlay, our local retail problems in the overlay. We discussed requiring childcare facilities on the ground floor of affordable housing buildings to address our need for universal preschool, all incredibly, incredibly important issues. But it made the discussion about the overlay more complicated and led to a lot more disagreements. So as you move forward with this, or if you do move forward with something like this in your neighborhood, I'd advise you to try to keep it a little more simple. You want to give enough guidance and predictability, and some of the amendments really did meet the AHO better, but many of them were a bit of an overreach and really tried to do too much. So, and then lastly, you know, another important thing to think about, and what we did in trying to get this passed, is building coalitions. We worked with housing advocates, affordable housing tenants, affordable housing developers, local political groups. We were able to bring out folks who don't normally attend public hearings. Studies show that most people who participate in public meetings are older, white, retired, and homeowners. If you haven't read the book Neighborhood Defenders, you should. Now, I fit 3 of those 4 categories. I'm not retired yet, but I'm older, I'm white, and I own a home. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and those voices are certainly important. But when those are all the voices you hear, especially in a city as diverse as Cambridge, you're not hearing from a true representation of your community. So we needed to bring out folks whose lives would really be impacted and changed by this ordinance. You also had to make sure that we were what we were proposing would actually work. The funding process for affordable housing is really complicated. Excuse me, and passing what may seem as a simple amendment could actually undermine the financial feasibility that you're trying to accomplish in a zoning petition like this. So you really had to bring in people who understood what it took to get things built. Excuse me, I'm choking a little. I'll conclude with this, and this is a message to other elected officials on the call. If you're going to move forward with this, there are always going to be people who are going to be concerned about change, who like things the way they are, who are going to give you a million reasons not to do something. But if you truly believe in equity, inclusion, dismantling systems of oppression and racism, and then as an elected official, you need to stick to your values and do what is right and let the politics play itself out. So that's kind of a journey through what this was all about. It was messy. It was long, but we eventually got there, and I think it's going to lead to some really important results for our community.
And thank you. I mean, it's been an incredible journey. We've watched a little bit from afar. There's been a question that's come up a couple times in the chat, in the Q&A, that you could just quickly help us. What percentage of the city is covered by the AHO? Is it?
It's the whole city.
The whole city is okay. So, and varying on these different height things that Iram was showing before. Right. So, Noah Sawyer, you've been handed this. What's the old line? A camel is a horse designed by a committee, right? This measure that had all of these items in it, and now you're charged with trying to make this work. And I think the first impression I think a lot of people have is that this is going to make projects so cheap that you're not going to need any subsidies. And so perhaps you can walk us through a project, but also explain how it may or may not change your calculation. And I know you've got a project you want to show us that describes that.
Sure, David. So, I think that first subject, just one piece of context that's important to add is, Cambridge is, as Iram mentioned, is small, it's dense, and that, land prices are high and construction costs are high too. So it's the environment that we're working in. And we'd love to find ways to do projects without subsidy, but, even we haven't figured that piece out entirely yet. So where I just want to start briefly is, you mentioned this sort of discretionary permit process that existed prior to the overlay. And I work for a nonprofit developer based in Cambridge. We've been developing housing for most of our 52-year history, and working under this discretionary permit process under 40B. And, looking over some of our recent projects, we had 2 projects that had lawsuits filed against them at the end of the permitting process, that delayed those projects by several years. We had 2 other projects that were reduced in size pretty significantly as a result of threatened lawsuits by the abutters. So our Elm Place project was reduced by about 25% in size in order for it to move forward. And even, we've had a lot of successful processes. So we just finished a discretionary permit process before the overlay passed for our Ridge Commons project. And it went well, but that entitlement took over 2 years from our first meeting from concept to approval. And so, under the old system, the projects were costing more than they should. They took longer than they should, and they weren't helping as many families as we wanted to. And I think what Mark and Iram both pointed to this idea about certainty, and that we had been operating in an environment of uncertainty. You don't know what is possible when you're requesting separate discretionary permits in a densely populated city that has made development difficult for us. So I'm going to talk briefly about one of our sites, sort of one of the first overlay projects that's coming about. So give me a quick second to pull the slide. And so this is, we're going to be talking about 52 New Street. And so it's a site that we actually acquired just before the overlay passed. And so had been hoping that the overlay would go into effect, but really we're planning that this was going to be a discretionary permit process when we started. So this site is located in sort of northwest Cambridge. It's not quite North Cambridge or West Cambridge. It is near some good amenities. It's near shopping. It's within walking distance of the end of the MBTA red subway line at Alewife at the top of your screen. And we acquired the site initially thinking that we were going to have to complete the 40B process. So here's just a quick aerial of the neighborhood. I think it's a little bit of a no man's land to people who live in Cambridge, that there is existing commercial, industrial, but also some new residential that's going in as well. One factor that was important to us, both as as an amenity, is that the site is right next to Danakey Park, which is a large open space. Also, parks have not sued us very often, so it's a place where it seemed like an advantage to us when we acquired the property with the help of the city. And just a quick overview of the site. It is a long and narrow parcel. It is a little bit over an acre. For those of you from out west, this might not make sense, but an acre is actually a pretty big site for us here in Cambridge. And the site as it exists is in an industrial zoning district. So this underlying zoning allows for housing, and as a site of this size is relatively permissive by Cambridge standards, but was not really where we wanted it to be in terms of what kind of project we thought had potential. So here's just a quick diagram showing the existing zoning, sort of the volumetric view of what's eligible under base zoning and what's buildable. And we're not going to build either of these blue cubes. We're in the middle of our design process right now. We have a community meeting coming up in about 2 weeks where we're going to unveil some initial concepts. So I encourage everyone who wants to attend that meeting. But the difference between the base zoning prior to the overlay and the affordable housing overlay has been fairly significant. That exemptions about height, around floor area ratio, particularly around parking ratio, allow us to do more than we would have under an as of right scenario. And the basic piece is that under base zoning, we thought we could accomplish perhaps 70 to 80 units of housing, but that housing, some of it would skew smaller, so 1 and 2 bedroom units. Under the overlay, what we think is possible is somewhere between 105 and 108 units of housing, which is a significant material difference in sort of what we can accomplish with this site. Beyond that, the designs that we are working through are skewed towards large family units, so 2 and 3 bedroom units. When you talk about affordable housing in Cambridge, the need is most acute and most stressing on families with children. And so the ability to get more units and also serve the population who's in most need is the key change that we're seeing as we look at this site. And then also, I just want to say that there's really a change in attitude. You know, as we talked about, this makes design clear and predictable when you've been in an unpredictable process before. And so it's created a design process that for us is really focused on the project, on other values in Cambridge like sustainability and good design and neighborhood character, you know, fitting in with the streetscape, and also really the families that we want to serve. So that's what we've gotten to spend our time working through this project and talking about, is those pieces, as opposed to designing around the zoning process. You know, the clear rules have helped us focus our design, and I think will lead to a better and you know, a higher quality project when we're done.
Mark, if you could rejoin us. We have just some really terrific set of questions, and I'm going to try and there's a couple of really important choices that got made here about who to help, and I'm wondering about that. So how did you decide that it was going to be 80 and 100% as opposed to a more mixed income strategy that might have allowed you to subsidize, have units that would be affordable for people at, you know, 50 or 30% of AMI by having some that were above market rate? So why not? What was the thing behind the decision not to go for more of a mixed income? And a little bit related to that, there've been some questions about unit size. So there's nothing in the ordinance as I read it that says these have to be, you know, so many of these kinds of units. And I'm wondering, again, why not do that? And is that going to get addressed somewhere else in the process? Iram, maybe we should start with you on any part of that question you want, and then Noah and Mark, if you want to weigh in on those questions as well.
Thanks, David. There's a couple pieces to your question. One is about the income spread, and then the second is about the kind of units to be developed. So I'll start with the income spread. And we actually, we recently, a couple of years ago, wrapped up our what we call Envision Cambridge, our comprehensive plan for the city. And as part of that, we developed some of the, you know, the meat and bones of something we have been thinking about, which is the AHO, and really started to make it, you know, come to life in terms of what shape it would take. And we did decide to go with 100% affordable for the sake, to some degree, of simplicity. At the same time, we talked about another mechanism, which we call super inclusionary, which would be an incentive to go higher than the 20% set aside that we currently require through our inclusionary ordinance. And as we started to look at some of the financial underpinnings of the market and being able to access sites, and also what is needed to cross-subsidize in a market rate setting without any city subsidy, we found that you would need twice as much density in order to build in the internal market rate to affordable subsidy. So the buildings would be much, much larger. And we were concerned at that point that doing it sort of at the same time as the AHO would really undermine our efforts to get real bang for our buck in terms of the 100% affordable buildings. It's also a little bit cleaner because, in Cambridge, we tend to work with our affordable housing builders right from the start, from the time that they're doing site selection, and the Affordable Housing Trust actually supports funding very often for site acquisition, unless somebody is doing infill on a site that they already own. So in that setting, it becomes really complicated to have that mix because it's a lot harder for the trust to then offer the same kind of support. So, so I would say that real mix, including market rate, is it's not something that's off the table, but we want to see how much success we achieve through this mechanism. And there's nothing actually stopping the council from going even beyond the 20% set aside that they already have in inclusionary. I mean, we have a commitment in that ordinance to come back every 5 years or so and do an analysis that comes back to the council that allows them to reevaluate that requirement.
I thought you were done, Iram. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say one thing on the second piece, and I think Mark, you will have more to add on this because there's a political component, of course, of getting things passed as well. That's important to consider. But in terms of the mix of what is required, like do we require home ownership or do we require large units? It's something, family size units is huge, very, very big for the council. And Mark can say more. However, we wanted to make sure that there is as much flexibility as possible because there's also need for housing for people coming out of homelessness. And we want to be able to ensure that the AHO can actually cater to that full range without locking affordable housing builders into one format or the other. Mark.
Yeah, and thank you, Iram. And I would say, when people talk about mixed income, when you really look at the range of this, these projects really, these developments really are mixed income in a lot of ways. So you could have a building. So if Just to Start builds, as the project that Noah was talking about, so you could have people in a 1-bedroom at 100% median income, a single person making 80 something thousand dollars a year, all the way down to somebody making, 50 or even less. Someone with a housing voucher would have access to these units as well. So they might have no income. And then you add to that, if you have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, then you could have people earning from 128, or I'm sorry, from like $120,000 a year, depending on the size of the apartment, to living in the same building with people who are moving out of homelessness and have housing vouchers and the income guidelines are waived for them. So, it's not mixed income in the sense of market rent and affordable, but you are going to get a range of incomes in these buildings because there is a range of incomes that qualify for these buildings. So these aren't about building, it's not public housing as in the Cambridge Housing Authority building. It's not mixed income like inclusionary, but you will get people of different income levels living in these buildings.
No, before you weigh in on that, actually, I want to add to the degree of difficulty for you.
Okay.
Well, no, there's a couple. There's 2 questions that in a way are also related to this. I think everybody who's looked at this first starts by saying, what does this do to land markets? Which is going to drive, again, some of these decisions about what you can afford. And I guess in your experience, not so much on New Street, because as you said, you bought that before, but as you've been looking at projects, is this causing markets to inflate, or is this causing you to be able to bid closer to what markets do? And then if you could also just let us know in terms of financing structure, a bunch of people wanted to know, are you expecting when you do a project like this to use things like low-income housing tax credits? And if you want to answer those, and if you can remember the earlier questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think to sort of tie this in with the earlier question, I think one of the reasons why the incomes are allowed up to 80 to 100% of median income is that the overlay was trying to accommodate both rental and home ownership projects. And Cambridge has a great affordable home ownership program that they support. Those people who are ready to buy homes, even sort of who need assistance from the city, are usually sometimes at higher income. So it allows for flexibility in sort of the kind of project. And we have both home ownership and rental projects in our queue right now. So on the acquisition front, I think that there are certainly people out there who are calling us who don't quite understand Cambridge, saying, "Oh, well, now you can pay more for our site," and that's not how we view it. Prior to the overlay, this sort of uncertainty factor really made it really difficult for us to buy properties at all, because we're required to be conservative when we don't know how many units we can actually get through permitting. And any site that we are interested in, there's others interested in it as well. Cambridge is a desirable place to build right now. And the problem is we're a nonprofit. We don't have access to risk tolerant money, somebody who is going to take a chance that you can get more units than expected. And it made it difficult for us to bid competitively against market providers for sites. And what the overlay does is it provides us a clear standard. It's pretty easy for us to find out a site is available and then look at what might be possible. The overlay is clear enough for us to determine within an hour or so what we could potentially build, and also what that means for a bid. And I think when we look at values, there's two pieces we take into account. Obviously, we're building below market housing that has some complexities when it comes to calculating what the land value is. We look at what competitors are willing to pay, and we also look at what the subsidies will allow, or they find it reasonable. So Iram and her staff are good at sort of making clear what they think is reasonable and unreasonable on a per unit basis, and what their projects will support. Over the last year since the overlays passed, we have put in offers on 3 properties, and we haven't gotten any of them. So this is I'm going to make this sort of a glass half full piece, though, in that one property we lost by a small amount, one we couldn't meet the seller's pricing expectations, and on the third, I think we just decided it wasn't an appropriate site for affordable housing. But that's 3 sites in the course of a year where we've had a chance to sort of be serious players, and I think that shows that the overlay is not going to change the entire city. Not every parcel can be snapped up by affordable housing developers, but that there are a lot more opportunities out there for us than there were before. And that is going to make a huge difference down the line as we finish up our current projects and start thinking about the next one.
Just to circle back to this question about unit size, my impression is, although while the ordinance doesn't specify a lot of family-sized units, which is clearly where some of the major need lies, that the fact that folks like Noah almost certainly are going to have to come back to the Affordable Housing Trust in Cambridge, in a way, is a de facto. And I don't know whether that was something that you sort of thought through, rather, because once you start to make specific rules, you don't leave flexibility. Was that why you didn't? I don't know, was it a planning judgment or a political judgment? And
I can start this off. I'm sure Mark will want to add to this. Yes, so there is, somebody just asked about whether we would consider in our inclusionary zoning having a measuring by square feet versus by number of units for that purpose. And the council did, in fact, we proposed and the council adopted in the inclusionary, the percentage set aside is based on square feet. And there is in fact a very strong emphasis on family size units. And there's in fact also a percentage requirement for family size units. So that priority that's set by the council very much, that policy guidance goes through and follows through to the Affordable Housing Trust. And absolutely, when they are evaluating projects for financial support, they are looking at what is that mix of uses. But they too want to have the flexibility, because sometimes like I said, there may be a particular purpose. You have veterans housing, you might have housing for folks, coming out of homelessness, and those are more than likely wanting to be smaller, and you probably don't want to have as much of a mix in those buildings. But at the same time, if it's just, plain vanilla affordable housing, then we do often want to also have that mix of unit sizes just to provide as much as much choice as possible to a range of families. Mark, I'm sure you'll have something to add to this.
Yeah, I think the hard part is, there's always this balance between you, as Iram said, you want to allow enough flexibility because projects are all different and funding mechanisms, might be different. But yet you also want to have some predictability and some standards. So it's this, it's this push and pull. And I think, sometimes it's sometimes you need to pass something and move with it and see you can't really see what the problems are until you're actually doing something, and you're actually in it. I mean, you obviously want to take your time and do your due diligence to try and, predict any unintended consequences and whatnot. But, my guess is that one of the things we built into the overlay, and Iram said also we did this in our inclusionary as well as our incentive zoning, is we're now requiring that these ordinances be reviewed every few years. The inclusionary zoning, for example, that 11.5% hadn't been reviewed for about around 20 years.
Yeah.
And then we finally did it, which was long overdue, and we raised it to 20%. So now we built these reviews into the zoning. So we'll come back and we will look at the overlay in a couple of years, and we'll see, all right, how many units did we get? What were the stumbling blocks? What worked? What didn't work? And we'll make adjustments as we see fit. But you could hold you would never pass anything if you want it to be absolutely perfect, because you can't predict that, right? So at some point you got to pull the trigger and do it, and then you go back and adjust as necessary.
I appreciate that, of the sort of realities of politics. We've come to the witching hour, and which is we have an enormous number of questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to. We tried to pick out the ones that seemed most significant. There's a fair bit of really good material on the City of Cambridge's website and on some of the advocacy groups' websites about this that I encourage folks to take a look at. This is a really extraordinary thing. I was really struck when I was looking at the registration list for this yesterday, and there's at least 36 cities represented in the audience out here from all over the country, from Somerville and Newton and Boston to San Diego and San Francisco, and lots of places in between: Dallas, Salt Lake City, Chattanooga, just Flint, just to name a few. In the course of this discussion and in the course of preparing for the discussion, I just want to highlight three things that really have stood out for me, that at least are my takeaways. One is this is an ordinance that was carefully developed, and Mark was describing all those zoning amendments. What he didn't tell you is those would come up, and often Mark or Iram would talk with people like Noah and say, what would this do? And Mark, I think what you told me was at one point that if they said, yeah, we can live with that, and if they said no, that's going to really screw up the economics. And the other piece of that was to make sure that you didn't totally blow up the land markets. So getting that to the point where Noah can be close, but not basically creating a premium that landowners are going to take. The second thing, which I think I didn't fully appreciate till I started digging in to organize this, and Noah, you talked about it, was the importance of certainty, and the idea that roughly what you're going to be able to build, and there's still enough guardrails that if you were proposing something that was utterly hideous or inappropriate, one would think that the housing trust, you just wouldn't be able to get the money. And then the last thing, and Mark, I really appreciated. So Iram, I'm going to give you a shout out, I think, for just really unbelievable staff work of figuring out how is this going to work. We have this great idea, but how's it going to work? But Mark, in the end, I really appreciated you're saying sometimes you have to pull the trigger, and some things are worth doing even if they might actually affect your political career, but that they involve really fundamental values. That unfortunately at times is not something we always see you know, and I'm not saying that you should go throw yourself on the train tracks for anything, but I really am really, I think it's a very powerful statement to say this is important. We should come back in 5 years and see how this worked out. Or I was going to ask you all what the world would look like, but there were other more pressing questions. I just want to thank you all. I want to thank the folks who've been joined us for this conversation. Encourage you to both look at the city's website and obviously the Joint Center's website and the Rappaport Institute's website for discussions about these and other important things. And please join me. You can't hear the applause, but everybody out there, you know, do dance hands or something. But thank you very much.
David, just for folks, you know, I'm easy to find on the City of Cambridge website. If there are other folks in other cities looking to do this, I am more than happy to talk to anybody. I know there are a lot of questions we didn't get to. People can email me questions, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about this, and I'm easy to find. So
thank you, Iram. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Mark. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank
Get
you.
out there and enjoy that mild weather.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Okay.
having us. Bye-bye.